Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Hello, Dr. Nelson. Long time no talk. Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, I know.
Again, want to thank Nationwide for the support of our podcast and their support of courageous conversations throughout the veterinary profession, and looking forward to continuing to share our platform both with you, Dr. Nelson, and with other guests who may be joining us.
Absolutely.
Dr. Jose Arce, AVMA immediate past president, born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, got a DVM degree as well as an undergraduate degree from Louisiana State University, has been involved with organized veterinary medicine throughout veterinary school, throughout his work and life experiences in Puerto Rico. And then last year, raised to the highest echelon in organized veterinary medicine, he received the crown and scepter and accolades associated with being president of the AVMA. Congratulations and welcome, Dr. Jose Arce.
Hola, Peter. Thanks for having me in this program. It's my pleasure to join your podcast.
Dr. Arce, we're honored that you accepted our invitation. And we want to thank you for your service as AVMA president. And now I understand you are dead president and you're still serving.
That's part of being the immediate dead president, like they say in Australia, of the AVMA. Last year was the big year as far as, duties and stuff, but I still have plenty on my suitcase and a lot of things are still happening until August when then I go into become a real dead president.
So you're a native of Puerto Rico, right? Correct?
Yes, born and raised. Yeah. I mean, my mother's side is all from Spain, and a lot of the vein of veterinary medicine came from our grandfather in Spain. But yeah, most of my family is from Puerto Rico.
So you want to tell us a little bit about how you got to LSU?
Yes, definitely. So veterinary medicine was something that I enjoyed, practicing as a volunteer throughout high school, working at my grandfather's farm in Spain. So when I applied to vet school, I looked at different places and I talked to some friends, that had gone to LSU. A classmate of my brother's in high school had gone to LSU, and he told me about the program. And the weather's not as crazy as cold and as it can get on some of the northern state. Initially, I was gonna go to Iowa State. I had even paid my dorm registration and all that, but then I ended up going to LSU for undergrad and then stayed for vet school.
Had you been to the United States and seen a lot of the United States? I mean, obviously residing in Puerto Rico, had you come and vacationed and seen much of the United States prior to going to vet school here?
So yeah, I was lucky. My dad was a physician, an ophthalmologist, and he was involved with the AMA and the Puerto Rico Medical Association. That's how I got a little bit of the interest into organized veterinary medicine. I saw that he enjoyed, going to meetings. As a child, I went with him to some AMA meetings in Chicago. They do the same, where they have one meeting in Chicago every year, and the other meeting they go around the country and have their annual convention. So I was lucky. My dad, he went to Oklahoma State for pre-med long time ago, and he worked hard. He came from a very poor family. And then found out about this program in Spain where he could study medicine for free as long as he returned to Puerto Rico and worked for the federal government or the government of Puerto Rico. I was lucky that he was a successful physician and I was able to travel, many cities and enjoy, getting to know the U.S. in my summer break, sometimes in Christmas. Yeah.
That was an interesting comment about being able to go to Spain, get a free education as long as you came back to Puerto Rico and worked for X amount of time.
Correct. Yeah.
How do we do that in veterinary medicine?
We used to have that in Puerto Rico. We used to have contracts with 12 veterinary schools, and that stopped before I got to vet school in 93. I want to say probably late, like 89, 90, and it worked very well. And sometimes they talk about opening a veterinary school here in Puerto Rico, and I wonder if that model is much better, especially being a small island. I don't think we can graduate more than 30 veterinarians a year to meet, the needs of the island. After that, we would have an overplus of veterinarians, and that would be another problem. So I think reestablishing a program like the one we had would be ideal. I'm seeing a lot of veterinary schools take more Puerto Rican students because the experiences that they had. I happen to be in the advisory council for Dean Oliver Garding at LSU. He came for the first time. A dean came to Puerto Rico from LSU during a convention, and he met with a lot of the alumni, and he's talking about as the class sizes increase at LSU, taking a potentially a lot more students from Puerto Rico. So I think exchanges like this would be ideal. We can talk here with the University of Puerto Rico or the Department of Health and come up with some of the funds so those students could go to any school in the US and pay as an in-state person would, and then the difference would be offset by the government of Puerto Rico.
We do have similar programs that are available now. There's a federal program that's supporting veterinarians that will locate in rural areas that essentially will repay their student loans if they stay in that area for a minimum of 3 years and practice in an area that's designated as a rural area by the state veterinarian. But many of those have petered out for different reasons. Either the state legislatures felt that there was no longer a shortage of veterinarians in their state, or there was no longer the political will to provide support for training in professions that they could not provide in the state. I know Mississippi had contracts with Auburn, LSU, and Tuskegee, and the intent was to make sure that their citizens could become a veterinarian if they wanted to. So the state paid the out-of-state fee for a certain number of slots, and many states followed that track for a while. But as is the case with education in general, as we began to defund education or defund the support of education relatively through taxes, those programs were the first to go.
The rural component addresses another maldistribution issue within the profession, but there are also veterinary deserts that are urban deserts. And I think what Puerto Rico was doing was help addressing the lack of veterinarians in Puerto Rico by helping to offset the cost of the education. How do we get the urban deserts to help encourage people from those communities to go to veterinary school and come back in the same way that we're doing it from a rural standpoint? Because I do think that is that goes to part of the access to care and diversity issues that we're dealing with. How do we get some of these urban deserts to help with the maldistribution discussion?
Well, before Dr. Arce comments on that, I just want to clarify exactly what we're talking about here. You're kind of mixing apples and oranges. On the one hand, you're talking about getting applicants from underserved areas to apply for vet school. The other is having graduates service those areas. And the programs have been targeting graduates servicing those areas or trying to address the maldistribution. But equity and access to education is a totally different issue and probably a larger problem to address because it includes access to quality education at the K through 12 level as well.
No, definitely. What Peter was saying is something that, we're getting to worry about it here in Puerto Rico. For many years, the majority of Puerto Rican students that went to study veterinary medicine in the US would come back. Now, with the student debt problems, most Puerto Rican students are out-of-state students, so they could be owing $450,000 when they graduate, depending on which school they went to. And unfortunately, the economics in Puerto Rico just came out of a recession. Basically, we're in bankruptcy, and we finally, got out of bankruptcy a few months ago. So it's tough. It's tough to come back to Puerto Rico and owe, whatever, $400,000 and get paid initially, less than $100,000 or $80,000, which not too many people get paid in the US. Things have gotten better. We see all these students getting offered signing bonuses over $100,000. and then jobs that pay him, three figures. It's hard to come back to Puerto Rico. So we're starting to see a lot of our graduates stay in the mainland, and down the road that could be troublesome, and we would see the same workforce issue that they're seeing in the mainland. I think a lot of us come back to Puerto Rico because of the quality of life, because we like the culture, and this is a fun place to live. It's great, it's beautiful island, also incredible food, a very united family oriented culture. But when it starts hitting your pocket, it's hard to meet the demands, and then you get an offer that's maybe twice. On top of that, our energy cost, electricity, it's maybe three times what it's in many places in the US. Water's more expensive, stuff. So definitely it's something that concerns us. And we try to form liaisons with different schools, like I'm doing at LSU, and other graduates from Tuskegee, from Ross. A lot of Puerto Ricans go there, but many are starting to stay on the mainland because the attractive job offers they get. And it's something that down the road, here the relief vet situations where we're starting to see a problem, where it's hard to get a relief vet. In the past, it was very easy. So I think it's starting, the workforce issue. It's starting to mimic what your guys are seeing on the mainland, and it's something that we definitely have to look out for. And like Phil said, we can go recruit students from the projects, from the poor neighborhoods, but after they graduate, they're not necessarily going to go back there when the reality of their lives and what they owe is tough. So I know a lot of people would love to go back to the country, and if they come from the farms or farmland, or go back from the inner city, but it's not always going to happen.
That was a very good encapsulation of where we are. The real question is, where do we go wrong? How did we get here? There was a time when there was the political will and wisdom where we understood the role of professionals in healthcare, whether it's veterinary medicine or human medicine. And after World War II, when all of our veterans came back home, there was more of an egalitarian approach to training professionals, when we finally realized that medicine was not just an aristocratic profession. And the GI Bill probably subsidized more doctors than any one time in history. But then education became almost privatized rather than a public service. And the financing of higher education suddenly shifted from the government to banks. And it's the financing of education that is our major issue. When we can't service our clients that need our service because we have to pay our debt, our educational debts back, that is not in the best interest of society. And so, being a past president of AVMA, what role does AVMA have in trying to correct that, or address that, or at least start moving the needle in that direction? And I'm sure you've had discussions about this in HOD and on the executive board. What is AVMA thinking about the issues, and how they might be able to help?
Yeah, definitely. There's different things we're trying to do. The first one was, the program that you spoke about a little bit earlier, the Veterinary Medicine Loan Repayment Act, that's trying to get people that serve in food animal or in public health to work in underserved areas. Right now, that program is being taxed 33%. So we have a bill in Congress that's gaining a lot of momentum, and hopefully soon we can pass it, because they have similar programs for physicians and for dentists, and they don't get taxed 33%. So that 33% could be potentially, if the program's handed at 100 million, could be another $33 million that goes into the program to help offset some of that and get some of our veterinarians into those underserved areas. The other one that we try to lobby in Congress is student debt. In the past, there's been a couple bills. I'm trying to think, one of them was even from a Puerto Rican congressman in Florida, Darren Soto. Yeah, that's his name. It's a zero interest student loan. We understand we don't have to pay everything for everybody, but at least let's get rid of that interest. And it's an investment on our country, to have veterinarians. And it's something that has moved back and forth. They've talked about low interest rate. When President Biden ran for president, he talked about pardoning all the students' loan. We know how far that's going to go, and all the roadblocks that it's seen right now, and especially when they talk about it during election time. So how serious are our legislators and our politicians about this? I don't know, but if the states don't support the vet schools more, if Congress doesn't help offset some of these interest rates, and costs are going to go up, just because that's just a matter of inflation and the cost of goods and electricity. There has to be a moment when the government realizes that what we're seeing right now, the shortage continues to grow, and then we're not going to be able to meet the needs of the state, agricultural needs and medicine needs, and something has to happen, because I don't see how we can continue on this road, and students in a couple of years will have, in-state students would have over $200,000 of debt, and the ones of out of state we're going to have more than $500,000. It's just I don't see how this can be continue to happen. And so there needs to be a moment when there has to be a change, that it's not going back to the old model, like back after the war, but something has to come from our government that helps offset this, because I don't think we can do it just with private industry and veterinary schools trying to be more effective. I just don't see how we can do it without the government offsetting some of this cost.
The profession has moved from a highly agrarian education-based model to a much more companion animal model. And almost concurrently, state funding, which created these veterinary schools on an agrarian basis, has started to decrease as the veterinary schools tend to produce fewer and fewer food animal veterinarians. So what we're seeing is capitalism at its worst and at its best, because I think the lack of funding at the state schools has taken tuition from a tenable level from a debt standpoint to there's sometimes not that much difference between your in-state tuition and your out-of-state tuition from school to school, depending upon the school and how much funding is there. So it's becoming an interesting discussion. And then, of course, you throw the privatization of the student loans in there, and it's really become a bumpy road. The best thing that's happened in the last 2 years or 3 years has been the significant bump in salaries, but I don't know how long that can last, because it's impacting the profitabilities for private and corporate hospitals,
as well as the ability of the consumer to pay.
That's
correct.
Clients, yeah.
Well, it impacts the veterinary schools, because the veterinary schools can't afford to hire the specialists because they can make so much more. So we've got this maelstrom, this vortex, and I'm not sure where we find the answers, but there's got to be some really smart people somewhere besides the three of us.
Well, it's clear that this is a complicated problem, and Dr. Arce is correct. Every year, everybody wants a raise, and that drives costs up. So we're going to pay more for everything, not just veterinary medicine, as we move forward. And I don't envy the federal board trying to mitigate that growth with mass economics. But I agree, Dr. Arce, everybody has to be at the table. It can't just be industry. We can't blame education for meeting the cost. But the government, Dr. Arce, I have to say, the government is us. Congress represents us. We put them there. And although we have to have a government entity, the political will comes from us. And I think part of the problem is nobody understands the healthcare system. Nobody understands the role of veterinary medicine. Whether it is a pet-centric profession or a food production, food safety profession, and I submit it's both, and I submit that both of them are important. But there's no lobby for pet owners in Congress unless we lobby for pet owners in Congress. But our role in food safety is part of the national defense, in my opinion. You know, if you want to be crass and accept Napoleon's view of that an army travels on its stomach, then you suddenly emphasize or highlight the role of veterinary medicine in making sure that that food supply is safe. But that food supply needs to be safe for our citizens, not just our army, which is comparable to having clean water whenever we turn on the tap. It's a public health issue, and everything veterinarians do contributes to the public health. Somehow that is not translated into a need for investment, as you said, Dr. Arce. I think organized veterinary medicine is going to have to do a better job of convincing that. I know AVMA and AAVMC lobby as hard as they can on the Hill, but all politics is local, and going to the Hill isn't enough. We don't have a national plan to address veterinary health care. It's a hodgepodge. It depends on the states. The schools are located in the states that recognize the need to support their food industry. That was the onus for most of our schools. The newer schools are being formed out of recognition of the cash cow, no pun intended, of veterinary medicine.
Correct.
However, some schools are actually trying to focus on producing food production veterinarians.
Yep.
And yet, when a graduate gets his or her degree, they still have the freedom of choice. Or they don't have the freedom of choice if they have a $400,000 debt to repay. And so, regardless of our intent in training, individuals still have to survive.
Yeah, and that's where things, it's reality. One thing your heart might be somewhere where you want to go serve back in the county you work, in the farm you work with food animal, and you graduate, you do an undergrad, you go to vet school, and you have all that student debt, and you have to make a decision, and sometimes it's not the one that your heart would want to make, and it's the one that your pocket or your debt forces you to. One thing that recently got passed and might give us some hope on the government understanding a little bit more the importance of veterinary medicine is the One Health bill that just got approved as part of the omnibus bill that got approved in December, and that's going to force the federal government to implement a lot of the One Health ideas in what the Department of Health does, USDA does. So hopefully, that will educate a lot of the people in Washington, a lot of people around the country working for some of these government entities of the importance of One Health and of the importance of veterinary medicine and how interchangeable we are with human medicine and human health, and hopefully that will reap benefits down the road to our profession. It's little things like that I think are going to help.
When President Kennedy was in office, he started the Peace Corps, and with the intent of encouraging every young graduate to spend some time in the Peace Corps before they went into whatever profession they went into. Has there ever been a similar discussion of a veterinary corps where veterinarians could actually spend time in areas of high need, or to those veterinary deserts that Peter talked about, whether it's rural or urban, doesn't matter. But essentially, that civil service would result in a reduction in their debt service. And they might do that for 2 to 3 years and then go on to their private profession. Has anyone ever discussed that in the halls of AVMA?
No, that I know. No, that's a interesting idea. Definitely. I, as far as I know, it has never been discussed, at least during the past, let's say, since 2014 that I've been involved with the board and the 3 years as president, or the way back when I started in the House of Delegates. I don't recall, an idea like that.
There are other benefits from that possibility as well. I mean, particularly if we can train veterinarians experientially in areas of labor need, so that if mad cow disease ever crosses our territory or crosses our border, people who have been in the Corps for a while are much more easily drafted to address those issues, so that we don't have a problem that Great Britain had, having to import veterinarians from other countries because they didn't have enough to deal with the immediate problem of culling herds, etc. This would help solve that problem by making sure everybody had the experience needed to respond to endemics and epidemics in food animal species.
You know, it's ironic that you mentioned mad cow, because I wrote mad cow down while Dr. Arce was speaking. And
did he remind you of a mad cow or something? I mean,
no, but he reminded me of the fact that we are a news-driven world, and unless there is a food, animal, milk, egg, and obviously avian influenza has influenced egg prices as well, unless it impacts something so it gets on one of the major news networks, it doesn't get the government's attention. And so mad cow 20, 25 years ago, Canadian border, you know, all of the different things that made mad cow headline news in the New York Times and every place else brought the veterinary profession into the forefront. There was an opportunity starting in March of 2020 with the coronavirus, which is a zoonotic, for the veterinary profession to actually have a greater voice and shine during that time, but it never really escalated. I think we are, I mean, in many cases, I still feel like we are the poor stepchild, maybe not even the poor stepchild, we make Cinderella look rich when it comes down to human health care because of all the attention that it gets. So the efforts at the One Health level are great, but how many veterinarians actually pay attention to it? And how many people in the world that are consumers of goods and services actually even understand that there's a One Health? And how many people even understand what veterinarians do? It is so interesting. And we're all on airplanes, and you start to talk to people about what veterinarians do, and they're not even fully understanding of all of the different things that the veterinary profession is invested in and involved with. Well, if the consumers aren't aware, the government is even less aware.
I beg to differ to that point, Peter. For your first statement about the government doesn't know about influenza until it hits the news, I think it's a little twisted. I actually think it's the government that usually makes the news. I believe that our colleagues in the USDA are much more aware of the status of avian influenza than the general public. And it's when the news media picks up on the issue. They usually don't pick up on it until they're wondering, why are egg prices going up? Or why are broilers going up? And then they find government experts and to answer that question. It may seem like the government didn't know about it, but they were battling avian influenza long before it took off. As a matter of fact, USDA was worried about it in 2015, particularly H1N1 and the spread of the endemic from the east to the west. So I think we have to be careful about over compartmentalizing sometimes. But once again, that is the difficulty about these discussions. The government is us. And I think what you're really trying to say is the government may not be responding as robustly as it should be or could be because we aren't aware as citizens to raise that cry. I'm amazed we allowed the government to make education more expensive for our children. It's our children that are suffering across the board. If any of our children want to be veterinarians, we've just finished talking about how expensive that's going to be. But whatever they want to be, veterinary graduates aren't the only graduates that have penal debt loads.
Yeah, and I think to your point, we have African Suiver knocking on the door right here in Puerto Rico. I have to agree with Dr. Nelson on the job that the USDA does. We just don't know about it, but I've met with the local USDA people because we know the threat of African swine fever getting to Puerto Rico and then getting to the mainland. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars that we could be lost potentially. And I met with USDA and at the same time with OIE and countries that know a lot more about African swine fever. And I would tell you the USDA does a much better job when this is something that is still hasn't affected us. But the knowledge, the people, I mean, they're doing an excellent job, and it's been over a year since it's been on the Dominican Republic, and we haven't seen it in Puerto Rico. And you go here on the airports, on the cruise ships, and there's a big presence of USDA, informing the public, taking the necessary measures to avoid for it to come here, getting to Puerto Rico. I agree with him in that we maybe as veterinarians don't discuss it among us and the veterinary profession and how important these things are, but the government agencies that are dealing with it are doing an excellent job.
Well, you said 4 words at the very beginning that reflect on 330 million people don't know about it.
Mhm.
You've got 3 people here who are more invested and more involved than 99.9% of the veterinary profession, and probably 100% of the American population. So this don't know about it. Yeah, it's great that they're doing a great job, but if nobody knows about it, maybe that's a good thing, but maybe it's a failure to actually help people understand on a global basis what needs to be done.
I'm not sure that they're not trying to share their information. The question is, are we listening?
Correct.
You can't blame the messenger if the audience doesn't come or if the audience doesn't want to listen. Look, nobody cared about avian influenza until they had to pay more money for their eggs and chicken. That's what brought it to the news media. Nobody wants to hear the sky is going to fall. Nobody wants to hear about climate change. Nobody wants to hear about what's going to happen after I die or in the next 10 years. It's the bane of privilege. I still remember Khrushchev coming over to the United States and getting upset at all the food that was just laid out in our grocery stores with no lines and being irritated at the excess that he perceived in American society. And when you can just go around the corner and get a meal, then you don't have to think much about how that meal is produced. And you only think about what it costs, not the impact on society. And so I think it's a lack of social interest, of community interest, that is the problem, not the messenger or the message. And in social media, we care more about our musicians dying than we do about the threat to our food. We have compartmentalized or balkanized our interest that much.
The veterinarian being the gatekeeper in many cases of these diseases, there are probably people who might even consider being a veterinarian if they knew that they could have an impact from that standpoint. And that was where I was trying to go with this, is this was a great marketing opportunity for the veterinary profession, whether it's African swine fever, whether it's coronavirus, whether it's avian influenza. This is a great opportunity for the government to realize we need more veterinarians in these specific areas and to make it easier to find, recruit, educate, and make affordable those opportunities. It's when the horse is already out of the barn, it's much harder to put it in, but we need to continue to recruit and identify people in public health and with a focus in One Health to make sure that we don't deal with a mad cow here, that we control the African swine fever, and that we also deal with avian influenza. So I'm trying to look at it as a marketing opportunity for the profession globally and as a way of helping increase disease prevention. That was where I was going with the message.
COVID did help us with that. And I think I remember going to Congress and it was always like okay, yeah, we're listening to you. And this was like, all right, hi, bye, take a picture. And now we're having deeper conversations. And I think COVID had a lot to do with it, and it was a perfect example that politicians could understand the importance of veterinary medicine, the importance of One Health, of working together, of veterinary medicine helping human medicine, whether it was with the testing at the vet schools, with helping with vaccine development. They got to know what we do. It's not just about, taking care of dogs and cats, but also doing the research to help combat this huge pandemic. And hopefully that put us in another level, and that will continue to happen, because we used it not as a marketing tool, just because we thought it was the perfect example for them to understand the importance of veterinary medicine to society.
If we're going to use the COVID experience as the pandemic as an example here, I'm afraid, even though what you're suggesting, Peter, resonates with me, is not that simple. Because even in the pandemic, we still have people in Congress denying whether the vaccine worked or not. There's an anti-science movement here. Again, I don't think the problem is the message as much as it is the politics and the unwillingness to accept the threat as a threat in order to protect whatever privileges we think we have. I'm not saying we don't focus on the message. I'm not saying we couldn't do a better job getting the message out. But I am saying that there's a tide that we're working against in terms of ignorance or willful disinformation that works against the good of the majority, the good of society, that we have to overcome. And specialists are specialists for a reason. But you're going to need twice as many if you need specialists who also communicate to the masses. But at the same time, we have people now who are undermining the veracity of specialists. And that works against the common good too.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you nationwide for your support. And thanks to all our listeners. And don't forget to join us next week when we finish our conversation with Dr. Arce. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.